friends, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. Today's episode is going to be a Secret Lives of Mormon Wives recap of episodes 1 through 3. So the other episode that I released in addition to this is a more comprehensive look at Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, talking about a couple of really important concepts. So the reason that I did that is when I watched the first episode of Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, I sincerely thought I could do a 4-hour podcast on just this episode between, culture within the culture of Utah and Mormonism. And, there was a lot of psychological concepts talked about, like scapegoating and autoimmune issues, gut health, and how that relates to perfectionism. And, I introduced some topics of locus of control, which is a concept that comes into play when it comes to religion and what do we believe is the center of how things happen to us. So that first episode really was a get to know the wives, get to know the women, get to know the families, get to know the partners. It was broad perspectives and interpretations of each person. And so today I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of things that were notable to me in episodes 1 through 3. And then I'm going to do another episode where I do 4 through 6. And then Amy Phillips and I are going to collab on EPs 7 to 8, which is the season or the series finale. Not the series finale, because who knows if it's going to come back or if it's getting picked up. I mean, I can't imagine that it wouldn't be, considering how popular it is. But so the thing for me, I just want to explain, is that normally I'm not a super trendy person. And when everyone was going wild about the show, I was just like, whatever. And then I watched the first episode and I was like, I have never been more in for anything in my life. And I'm going to say something maybe a little bit controversial. I liked it better than Housewives. And I will tell you why. I liked it better than most Housewives, I should say, because there's still some Housewives franchises that are really good. I think OC is good. I think Beverly Hills is good. But Secret Lives of Mormon Wives gives us something that Housewives doesn't, which is real talk about real stuff. So these women are really talking about, warts and all about their lives. They're open, they're honest. We get a lot of focus on psychological concepts, mental health. We talk about porn addiction. And these women they're interesting. I mean, there's maybe a couple that I'm not the biggest fans of, but other than that, I mean, they're beautiful, they're interesting, they're multidimensional. And I just found myself watching this and feeling way more invested in this than I do on Housewives. And I feel like the reason for that, in my opinion, is Housewives are getting too performative. It's like all about fashion, like fashion, hun, personally, I'm like, who cares about that? I don't care about Bronwyn's heart coat that costs $4 million. Who gives a hoot? I mean, for me, that's not what it's about. And for me, honestly, that takes me out of it. The Wendy's commercials in Salt Lake City. So I guess what I'm saying is I feel like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, they were nobodies. And so they did this show. It's a great show. And I assume if they were on the show for 10 seasons or 12 seasons, they may have some more demands or they may behave a little bit differently. But this is what good reality TV, in my opinion, should be. So fortunately for you all, I'm obsessed. I'm all in. In addition to the episodes that I've outlined that I'm going to do, I am going to have someone come on the show who is a friend of mine who converted to Mormonism as an adult. And so the other thing I want to say is that in the first episode I released, I talked a lot about Mormonism. And that was from information that I found online from people who either have blogs or who've practiced. I can give you the specific site. I just don't remember it right now, but there were a couple. So in fairness, I'm not Mormon. I am familiar with Mormonism based on what I've read, what I've heard, what other people have said. But as I mentioned last episode, is that we all interpret religion differently. We interpret it differently and we live it differently. And so I want to be clear, the things that I talked about last episode, I'm not an expert on Mormonism. If I spoke incorrectly, please forgive. And I will have someone on the show to speak to some of that, again, from their perspective. And so let's get it started. Let me start with episode 1. So the weird thing about the show is that between episode 1 and episode 2, there's almost a year that elapses. And it's almost like, for me, episode 1 is a different show from episodes 2 through 8. It's like I said, it's interesting, it's fresh, it's new. I've been a lover of reality TV for so long, and I feel like there's all these tropes and like blah blah blah. And I don't know, these women, they really got something going. So in the first episode, we are introduced to, again, Taylor Frankie Paul is the person who started Mom Talk, and she went live with, talking about it was a confession about being a swinger, which again, I've shared my thoughts about this, on the first episode, which is like so much of sex is shame-based, and especially with a lot of religious shame-based rhetoric around it. And so sex doesn't need to be shame-based. It shouldn't be shame-based. There's, we all deserve pleasure in life. It's just been pathologized since the beginning of time. And so, I just hope to talk about and advocate for that, because I think what I'm going to talk about with sex, love addiction, porn addiction, whatever it is, it's our perception of this is problematic, right? And so our perception is our reality, but is our perception real reality? So it's a lot of these concepts are dependent upon very private things that the person thinks, and it's harder to delineate than a lot of people think that it is, who, don't have experience in a clinical setting. So first episode, Taylor explains that she was married in the temple and got divorced a month prior to episode 1, which was now, I think, almost 2 years ago. She introduced Dakota, her new boyfriend, and Dakota is a recovering addict from fentanyl. So here's the thing I'm going to say about Dakota, is that I talked about in the first episode of my podcast that I did about this, is that he gives me vibes. And so the thing about Dakota that I have heard some chatter about that I've noticed too, is his pupils. Dakota's pupils are usually very dilated. And it's interesting because people have noticed that, which is interesting because it's something that usually a lot of folks don't notice, but clinically it is very significant. Our pupils being dilated or being pinned, as they call it, like really small or a lot bigger, it depends on a host of factors. And so the thing with his pupils being dilated, which means they're bigger, is pupil dilation can be a sign of opioid withdrawal. I worked in a residential treatment facility. I learned a lot. It was probably the most exciting and knowledge-rich job I had. And so I learned a lot about addiction and how that can impact us. And so people using fentanyl, that's, in my opinion, that is end stage addiction. Fentanyl, I don't know if anyone has seen this, but picture a penny and then, basically like a grain of fentanyl that's like the tip of a pencil, like a little teeny dot is enough to kill an average person. And so fentanyl, when you're using fentanyl straight, that is really indicative of this is really bad. And so I don't know Dakota. I'm not taking his inventory, but that is what I can tell you about, when people use substances. It's what do they use? How do they use it? That tells you a lot about what they may have going on. And so I just did want to say that in terms of for Dakota, is that it can be a side of withdrawing, and he is in recovery. And so for some people to get into recovery from substances, they use medications, Suboxone, opioid replacements, naltrexone, all these different medications. And so we don't know where he's at in this journey. But dilated pupils can also be a sign of using substances, stimulants, amphetamines, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go into all of that. I have to be mindful and pace myself because there's a lot of information here. So I just wanted to say that. And so what I will acknowledge is that Taylor and Dakota are a chaos tornado. And so in episode 1, Dakota talked about we really shouldn't be in a relationship because in recovery, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And he's right. And at first I thought, well, maybe that means he's taking his recovery seriously. And then, to see the relationship that they formed, in my opinion, Taylor and Dakota have kind of a chaos tornado relationship that is very similar to addiction. So there are some people's relationships where chaos is so prevalent that it gives shades of very problematic relationship, like maybe a love addiction or a sex addiction or a codependency or addiction to one another. And that's the vibes that I get from this relationship. There's this push and pull of Dakota saying, well, we can't be in a relationship. But then we see him in later episodes talk about, I need you, I need you, I need you, I need you. If I don't have you, I can't be happy. And it's like, wowza, that is really toxic, really unhealthy. So I am definitely going to break down, in my opinion, Dakota, people, when they stop using substances, can act out their addiction in other ways. And it's called process addictions. So process addiction is something like love, sex, food, internet, phone, gambling, stuff like that. You're not addicted to a substance, but you're addicted to a process. And so sometimes relationships can get this really toxic feeling like that. And so for me, what that tells me is that they both have work to do and are using each other as a substance. They're using each other to distract, to deflect from their lives, to feel ups and downs. And, it's just a very unhealthy relationship. And as of my last recording, news was that they broke up, but now news is that they didn't. And I swear, as I'm recording these episodes, there's new stuff coming out all the time. And so it's really hard to keep up with. And so, as of me recording this, who knows when this goes out, what's going to happen. But another interesting thing that I got from episode 1 is with Taylor's mom. Taylor's mom, how she triggers me. I will be honest about that. Taylor's mom, in my opinion, gives off vibes of someone who is more concerned about what other people think than about appropriately loving her child. And so in episode 1, Taylor is talking to her mom. And by the way, you can tell that this is just who Taylor's mom is, because when Taylor's mom says these hurtful things that are just so inappropriate, Taylor doesn't even flinch. And you can tell it's because she's just heard this her whole life. So, Taylor's mom says, you've done bad things that make you look bad. Have you talked to the bishop? I love you, but you don't always make the right choices. I'm tired of you doing everything for this family. Or I'm tired of you doing everything to this family, and then walks away. So, oh my gosh, I really struggle. I don't even know her name. And I swear, I think like Tammy Pescatelli was on my podcast and she talked about she has this curse where when she doesn't like people, she'll just forget their name. And I swear the same thing has happened for me with Taylor's mom. I think I have it written down somewhere in here. It's probably Linda or Terriers. I have no idea, call back to Monica Garcia's mom. But anyway, so I didn't like how she was talking to her child. And have you talked to the bishop? Who cares about the bishop? Your child is in pain and she's suffering. And this is your suggestion? I mean, listen, I will say that I went to school when I was in my graduate program, getting my master's degree in clinical psychology. I went to school with a gentleman who was a priest, and of his own volition, he went to get a degree in counseling because he wanted to do pastoral counseling and he wanted to be good at it. And he was wonderful and I respected him very much. But that's a rare circumstance that a pastoral counselor will have an actual degree in, clinical psychology, what have you. The point is people have to seek out the knowledge they want to impart. And some religious folks do that and some religious folks don't. And counseling in a religious context shouldn't just be, well, stop doing that, because that's not helpful. So I just think that, when you say something and then followed by a but, it completely takes away everything that you just said before it. And so saying, I love you, but you don't make good choices. Well, that just sounds like I'm ashamed of you. I don't care for you. You're doing things to this family. And then she just walks away. And it's like, here's why I empathize with Taylor Frankie Paul, because she is the scapegoat, not only of her family, but of this group. And as the scapegoat and a black sheep, I relate to that very much. So I'm just being honest with that because I clearly have a perspective here. And, I want to be honest about that. But Taylor Frankie Paul is actually, and I don't know why I keep calling her that. I guess I should just call her Taylor. But I think that she has been the scapegoat for Whitney and is the scapegoat for her family, because when you look at a family system, is one person really capable of making an entire family system look bad? I don't think so. Now, the family system will say that because they're trying to shame the person And I don't know about you all, but I don't know shaming has ever been an effective thing to help people change their behaviors. I've never known that to be true. So more to talk about with Taylor's parents, and trust me, I will mention it all. Now, let's talk about Whitney. In the first episode, we find out that she and Connor moved to Hawaii for 2 months. She claimed to get away from the noise about the mom talk scandal. She said, here's the thing with Whitney. She constantly contradicts herself. And the thing that I love about doing what I do and watching Whitney is I am recognizing, and I'm going to call out every single way that she contradicts herself and tells on herself. Because people who are trying to act one way and then feel another, their subconscious is always going to slip up. Very few people are that good of a liar that they can keep such track of things. Aside from, people with serious psychopathology, sociopaths, stuff like that, well, they can be consistent because their brains are broken. But anyway, so Whitney claims that she never wanted being a mom to define her. So she joined Mom Talk. That's literally the opposite. So Whitney has a hard time. We all need attention, right? Everybody needs attention and love, but Whitney is the type of person who does something for attention and then claims and promises that that's not what she's doing. And it is what she's doing. If Whitney could just stop being so, I don't even know what the word I want to use is, if she could just stop pathologizing so much and just ask for the love and support that she needs instead of doing all these things like leaving the mom chat so people reach out to her or moving away and avoiding everything. So her solution was to move to Hawaii for 2 months to get away from the noise of the mom talk thing. But then we find out in this episode that it had nothing to do with mom talk. And it was about the fact that Connor was on Tinder. Everyone found out. She lied about it to protect him, but it was actually true. So Whitney, we will see throughout this entire series how she avoids and just runs away, avoids, runs away. If she is not told that you're right, you're perfect, yes, we're behind you, if she is not given unconditional positive regard, which, by the way, doesn't exist in a friend group, the love that Whitney's looking for is unconditional love and support. And the only people that we're supposed to get that from is our parents. And so for those of us who didn't get that from parents, sometimes it's looked for in other ways, but it's a setup for failure because friends, there are conditions on friendships. There are conditions on romantic relationships. So I think that's one of the issues for Whitney is that I think there's a lot of pain behind this. But so we see here is that she had this conversation with Connor in front of the cameras, which really to me was kind of like, you need to talk to the cameras and these people and do your mea culpa. And it felt very planned and executed. But so Connor says, I had a real problem and it led to something that hurt my wife. I'm so sorry and I'm working on myself. And it felt written. It felt like it was written and it was practiced. And then Whitney says something, the sin is more serious. And she talks about the church and, wanting to tell the girls. And so when she tells the girls, she says, I lied because I was embarrassed. He was struggling with porn addiction. Now, this is what she calls it, porn addiction. She said there's a reason why people do things, and it was going on the whole marriage. And then she admits, we left because I wanted to get away from that. So here's a couple of things that I clocked in this. Number one, there's a reason why people do things. And so she's giving Connor grace, but I think she's projecting her stuff onto Taylor because Taylor is the behavioral representation of someone in Mormonism who is doing everything technically wrong. And I think that Whitney doesn't feel that she can feel that towards her husband because she just wants to keep having babies and pretend everything's fine and move forward. So then she takes that anger and resentment that isn't Taylor's and projects it onto Taylor. That is my number one thing that I get from this. Number two, the whole marriage. So I think at this point, maybe they were married for 5 years because I think now they've been married for 7. And again, there was like a 2-year gap. So that is I'm stuttering because that is a betrayal in every way, shape, and form. It's not just like a once it happened or it was like a period. Their whole marriage. So Whitney, what I'm understanding here is that she is feeling like betrayed. She's been lied to, but she still wants to keep this queen bee mentality. And so it's this almost could see it in real time where she's like, well, I still want to be the queen. I want to be the queen bee of mom talk. So to do that, I just have to pretend everything is fine here, keep having more babies, be a good Mormon wife, blah, blah, blah. And that's a setup for failure because I think she's already ignoring her stuff, which again it makes her lash out towards the other women, which we see throughout the entire rest of the season. Now, I have a lot of information about sex addiction, love addiction, porn addiction, but if I go into that all right now, this episode will be 14 hours long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a separate episode about specifically some of the differences between sex addiction, love addiction, and porn addiction. But what I will say, they're all different things. And in the psychological community, if you have a theory, it's only a theory until it's proven by research and studies and things like that. So there is a lot of dissension in the world of psychology about porn addiction even being an addiction. So the long and the short of it is that in the research studies, when they're looking at brain studies of people who watch pornography, doesn't light up the same way that it does for people who have addictions to, let's say, gambling or even love addiction has proved to show more brain activity than porn addiction. And so the point is that there is so many varied thoughts about this, but what it comes down to is our own shame and perception around what it is that we're doing. Because some studies show that when people have shame around watching a lot of pornography, they may not be watching more than the average person, but they feel it's pathological, right? So stay tuned. I'm going to do a YBT short about sex addiction, love addiction, porn addiction in related to Connor and Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. So stay tuned for that. And then we see in the first episode where Demi expressed being angry with Taylor because she was too friendly with Brett. And so the reason I mention this now is because in episode 6, maybe, I think there was a confrontation about this. And so, we're going to talk about that more. But so it's just the fact that some people do not take kindly to a flirty attitude towards someone they love. It's a betrayal. It's not acceptable. It's acceptable to Taylor, but it's not acceptable to her. And so Demi, what she did was she held this in for how many episodes? And then in episode 6, it just kind of like came out. And so if you're upset about something and you just stuff it, it's going to explode in the wrong way at the wrong moment. I'm just telling you all that. That's how it's going to go. And so that's kind of what went on. But at the end of this episode, what we see is a 911 call where Taylor's neighbors called and she was arrested for domestic violence. Specifically, so we go to episode 2, the Book of Belonging, and there is a 11-month gap between episode 1 and episode 2. So episode 1 ends, we see this 911 call. We see Taylor behaving, sincerely out of control. I was so worried for her. I've participated in many psychiatric emergencies and I can tell one when I see one. And what was interesting about Taylor is the whole episode 1, I noticed that she was just like flat. She had this flat kind of approach to things. And I thought, wow, how is she not freaking out about all of this? And so what I could tell she was doing, she was stuffing it, or she was dissociating, she was separating herself from it. And then what happens again when we do that is it will come out in ways, especially when using a substance. So she was intoxicated, probably drinking too much because of the stress of all these quote unquote scandals, which I just call being a person, right? You can call it a scandal, but as people, do you know anyone who hasn't messed up or that's part of our humanity. And so judging that as if we all haven't messed up is just wild to me. But so what Taylor was charged with was aggravated assault and she was placed on 3 years of probation. So essentially, she outlines in episode 2, she had, the swinger scandal and then the divorce and then this new relationship. And then she had a miscarriage. And then she had this other scandal with her legal stuff after the arrest. And then she was pregnant. And so we see episode 2 of Taylor being very pregnant, which I just thought, I respect everyone's right to make their own choices. I just knew with the state of her relationship with Dakota, I just worried for her and the child. And I just knew that it wasn't just miraculously going to be a better situation, because the thing that's wild to me is that people think getting married and having babies is going to solve problems, and absolutely does the opposite. It takes any cracks in the foundation of your relationship and magnifies them times 1,000. It's basically like saying, oh, we have a crack in the foundation. Let's build the most giant house that we can and just pretend that the crack isn't there. And then all of a sudden the house falls apart and you're like, well, why? Well, it's because you built your house on a cracked foundation. And so there's no perfect relationship, but gosh, sweet Taylor, she deserves so much better than that. But the problem is she doesn't realize it. So again, we see the ladies talking about how Taylor thinks with her vagina, which I was just like, yikes. And they're talking about how it put a negative image of mom talk. Let's change the culture because brand deals have gone down. That's our livelihood. We need to change the culture. So this is a case of two things can be true, which is apparently, as I mentioned in my first episode, these women are making so much money from being a content creator that they are the breadwinners of their home and they have a whole separate house to just film content. Okay. That you're making a lot of money. So I understand this is their livelihood. This is their freedom. This is how they support themselves and their families. So then we see Taylor's mom again talking about how she's aged her, which is Taylor's mom cares about Taylor's mom. That woman cares about herself because your daughter is drowning and all you can say is you've aged me. How about I love you and I'm so concerned for you? How about, feel so helpless and, there's ways that she could have said things different, but she didn't because I don't think she means that. I think she does see Taylor as like an albatross around her neck. And that's just like really shitty because Taylor is a wonderful person who's deserving of love. She is a chaos tornado, but there's reasons for that. Her mom probably, well, part of the reason. But anyway, so then Taylor says, I feel like I don't deserve this happy ending, which to me tells me that she's self-sabotaging. And she said, I'm hurting so bad. I had a psychotic break because I didn't know how to handle it. And when I watched that video, that's sincerely what I saw. Like, I would never say that, but she called it a psychotic break. And I'm telling you, I saw someone whose mental health just cracked into a million pieces because she was ignoring it. And so as Taylor's talking about this, her mom literally seems uncomfortable. She seems like a deer in headlights and doesn't emotionally attend to her at all. She looked visibly uncomfortable. And so what I want to say is behind shitty behavior is usually someone who didn't receive the love that they needed and deserved. And so I think that Taylor doesn't know how to be loved because this is her mom who doesn't know how to love her, who seems visibly uncomfortable at any sort of emotion. And unless Taylor's perfect, it seems like her love is very conditional. And so this is what I'm going back to is that Taylor is looking for unconditional love with a partner, which doesn't exist because it's not appropriate. We have conditions on our partners. And I believe that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. Taylor ultimately is wounded and didn't get the love that she needed growing up, still doesn't. And so she's looking for it in people who can't give it to her. And that's what leads to the chaos tornado, which makes me very sad because I really adore Taylor. I think she's a really wonderful soul. Another thing I thought was interesting in the second episode is that before they do one of their TikTok dances, they say, "Dear Lord, make me the biggest star the world has ever known." And it just was like, huh, that's interesting. So for me, when I go on and do my podcast, I have a very different approach. And listen, what's right for me is not right for everybody, but I'm just saying I did have a reaction to that because I understand that people produce content for various different reasons. And I'm not saying for me, of course, like this is not totally altruistic. Of course, I benefit from this, right? I get paid, some money from ads and things like that, Spreaker Supporters Club. And it does feel good for me because I legitimately get so much emotional support from this community. I'm not even joking. The messages that I've received have been so lovely and so wonderful. And so my point is that I do this to help people, but I get something out of it. And so when people do content, of course, it's never going to be altruistic completely, but just thought it was interesting. And it shows an external locus of control, which I talked about in episode 1, which is that they're giving their power up and showing like, please help me with this because I'm not capable of doing this on my own. And for me, I think why I've been successful is I have a very internal locus of control, which is I control my fate. I control what content I do, how I put it out, what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it, what my persona is going to be. And through that, I'm able to be successful. And I am the reason for that. So imagine being successful, but then thinking that it has nothing to do with you and it all has to do with your God or somebody else. Another interesting thing from episode 2 that I did already touch on, but I want to talk about again, is that Whitney is talking to her mother about being offered the sex toy brand deal. And, the Mormon religion is very conservative. So it leads to this topic being taboo. And what I want to say is that shame and lack of knowledge is dangerous. And then they talked about how women don't orgasm. And then Layla admitted to never having an orgasm. She's 23. She has 2 kids. And I'm like, girl, this has got to change. Because, the thing that I like, it's like, I like what Whitney was doing, but she was really doing it for her own self. But in the process, there were good things that came from it. So, like, for example, I think she was talking about how it's important to inspire women and it's important to empower them without shame and guilt around sex toys. There is absolutely nothing wrong with sex toys. For a lot of folks, they are an integral part of intimacy with a partner or by themselves. And guess what? None of those are problematic unless it becomes a problem for you. In your perspective, if it becomes something compulsive or what have you, right, then that takes a turn. But what I'm talking about is when we pathologize topics that shouldn't be pathologized and add the religious shame and guilt and all this stuff, it just creates this toxic environment around sex that is so mind-boggling to me as a 43-year-old woman. And so I loved that Layla and some of the other women talked about how sex is for them too. They're not just concubines for their men. And basically, concubine is a fancy term for a sex slave. And there are some parts of Mormonism, there are some parts of certain religions where women are to serve their men in that way. And you can call it what you want, but there's some real dark side to that stuff. And so I like that these women are having different conversations around sex and sex toys and orgasms, and all people deserve pleasure. Okay? All people do. And so I hope for Layla, this has changed. Sincerely, I hope it has. The main shift that we see in episode 2 is where Whitney is trying to be the ringleader of trying to be the face of Mom Talk and quote unquote retooling their image, which again, when it comes to drama and it comes to scandal, when you have a brand and you're making money, there's some of that that's just like necessary. And then there's some of it that's just her trying to knock Taylor out and be a queen bee. We also see Taylor's parents sit together with her at a table and say, they don't like that she's not married because, in the Mormon religion, that's kind of the rule. And like I said, marriage only creates more problems. It doesn't solve them. I don't think that's the best thing for Taylor, but I think sometimes her parents don't want what's best for her. They want what's best for them to make them look better. And Taylor says to her parents, you would rather me do it alone? And they said, yeah, I don't want a revolving door of men. You shouldn't have gotten pregnant. What the holy hell? How is that supposed to help this woman? Please tell me you shouldn't have gotten pregnant. Well, let me just click my heels and turn back time. I just feel it's just such a shitty response. Like they just cannot attend to this girl how she needs to be attended to. And even the dad, they're just both so laissez-faire and just so, gosh, it drives me wild. So then we see Taylor's baby shower at the White Shanty. Of course, Whitney didn't come. Whitney didn't come because she didn't want to be involved with the mess of it all. But really, it's just she literally runs away. Whitney, her middle name should be Avoidance. Whitney Avoidance Levitt. Okay, that's her new name. Because she'll come up with a great lie about why I'm not doing this, but it really is about avoidance. And I think she lies to herself too. So Whitney was judgmental and rude for not communicating with her about the shower. And then of course we see later where Whitney is like, she'll do something, it hurts someone's feelings, and then she takes a victim role. And I'm just like, girl, I can't with you. So Macy, we see also in episode 2 how Macy observed verbal abuse of Taylor from Dakota. She says, he hasn't treated you the way you want to be treated. Taylor isn't going to be able to choose someone who knows how to love her because of her parents. That's my belief. And 2 weeks prior to the pregnancy, she was trying to get out of the relationship. We see that in episode 2. And so they've had this very volatile on again, off again relationship. And it just gives Whitney room to say, well, you're trashy, so let me be the face of mom talk. But Macy, to me, Macy is the friend that we all need. I like that Macy sees Dakota for who he is. And, the way that he speaks to her is verbally abusive. For sure, 1,000%. There's no sugarcoating that. And so I like that Macy can be a friend to Taylor in the way that Taylor actually needs. And that's why Taylor loves and trusts her, because she has no one in her life that ever does that, including her parents. So when Whitney was talking to her mom about the sex toy brand deal, her mom said, when you're seeking pleasure, it can get out of hand. And I just face palmed. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, there are defense mechanisms where if you're told that you can't do something, there's this urge to want to do that even more. However, when you're saying that if you seek too much pleasure, it can get out of hand, what you're saying is, I don't trust me. I don't trust me to manage this appropriately, so I'm just going to avoid it. And what does that sound like to you? That sounds like Whitney Avoidance Levitt. And so my point is that Whitney's mom seems lovely, but avoiding stressors, avoiding triggers, avoiding hard things is not the way to learn how to cope with said hard things. It isn't. So I just found that so interesting. So it's like I loved Whitney's conversation with her mom, and I loved the cycle breaking aspect, but I really think it was more about Whitney, the $20,000. But still, I did love that part of it. I also find it so interesting that Dakota, when men who are problematic see someone that sees them for who they are, they act a certain way towards that person. And that is how Dakota is acting towards Macy. So Macy is the one who sees his red flags. And so he treats her badly, which is a red flag in and of itself. And then one thing Taylor said is that I'm scared of closeness because closeness means judgment. And Macy was the first person to show her unconditional love and support. And then think that one of the things I wrote here is that, Whitney was talking to Connor and on speakerphone with, I forget who it was. And she was like cursing in front of her kids and then pretending her kids weren't even there. And then Connor was like, hey, hold on. And okay, so what did that tell me is that Whitney really is about Whitney. She acts like this is about this, it's about that, it's about other people. Whitney is really about Whitney. It's coming up, we see some things with her that for me are huge red flags. Okay. Now let's move on to episode 3, which is the Book of Saints and Sinners. Macy, Michaela, and Whitney get together and they confront Whitney about, why didn't you tell Taylor you weren't coming to the shower? And she goes, I didn't think to text her. And Michaela, here's what I love about Michaela. Michaela is one of those people who she just gets it. And the other thing is Michaela, Demi, and Taylor, I would say, are all women who will just say it with their whole chest. They'll say it not being unkind, not being inappropriate. They'll just say things how they are, and they do have their finger on the pulse. And Michaela says in her talking head, it was calculated. Whitney, it was calculated that she didn't text her, that she didn't go to the shower, because we then see when Whitney leaves the group chat, I forgot what episode that's in, she does these things. She doesn't show up, she leaves whatever, because she wants people to flock to her to say, Whitney, why didn't you come? We love you so much. And it's like, well, that's not mature. That's not healthy. That's not how life works. And so these women kind of have Whitney's number. And I did enjoy watching them call her on stuff and just having her get mad and then avoid. It was like they call her on stuff. She gets mad. She avoids. Repeat, 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 repeat till we all die. It's crazy. So then we see the baby blessing with Zach and Jen. And as I've mentioned, Zach Affleck, I am allergic. I am allergic to him. I'm allergic to men like him. I'm allergic to his personality. I'm allergic to everything about him. So I'm going to be mindful in how I talk about this. Zach is graduating from BYU and going to medical school. And what's interesting is Jen is the breadwinner and putting him essentially through school. But that makes his king baby, fragile little ego very upset. And those of you who don't know what a king baby is, a baby is someone throws temper tantrums when they don't get the things that they want from people. And they also expect to have things go their way all the time. It's usually something that we talk about in the context of addiction. However, you can also see king baby in the context of many other situations, including this one. So it's like she's being the breadwinner, having his children, putting him through school, and yet there's nothing but control and verbal abuse. Taylor and Dakota, one thing when I noticed, so when they were going to the baby blessing, Taylor and Dakota came into the house and Dakota literally pushed her out of the way to get in before her. As you all know, those of you who've listened to me for long enough, you know that there are these little teeny things that I see, observe, hear that they stick in my brain. They stick in the back, and that was one of them. It was small. It literally was like an incidental finding, meaning they were filming something else and they just happened to catch it. And I just thought, like, that does tell you something about Dakota. Let me push my pregnant girlfriend, who I claim is the love of my life, out of the way so I can get in the house first. That is so wild to me. So wild. And here's the thing. He pushed her almost like a little bit like against the door. She had to use her hand to like steady herself. Episode 3, I'm telling you, go back and watch it. It was wild. And it just tells me about his level of self-importance, his level of respect for her, his level of respect for women. How have I not mentioned this until now is that soda is basically Mormon crack. They have swigs and soda fountains at every single corner. And so at the baby blessing, they had like a soda jerk. And I actually thought that was kind of cool, right? Because, I love a non-alcoholic option. But the thing that's odd to me is that they can't do coffee, right? Which, by the way, I will tell people listening to this, I don't know if you know this or not, I can't drink any caffeine because it gives me terrible migraines. So the only thing I can do is like a little bit of like green tea, which has like a tiny bit of caffeine. And if I do more than 1 cup, I will get a migraine. And so your girl just raw dogs chronic fatigue, and it's atrocious. And the reason that I'm saying this, though, is that I understand why people, they need a pick-me-up, right? Like caffeine is a drug, just like everything else. Caffeine is a drug, just like Tylenol, just like marijuana, just like everything. It's a drug. And so it's like they use soda to get their sugar boost or the caffeine boost that they can't get from coffee. But then that becomes like then that's all they do. And so what I will tell you personally is that there are 2 things that I don't do that contribute to my health and wellness. Number 1 is I don't drink alcohol. And number 2 is I don't drink soda. I'm not saying I'm better than people, but what I'm saying is when people say, wow, you have 1 million health problems, how do you look so good? I'm telling you, it's because of some of these choices that I make. And if I do drink soda, it's a regular soda, which, by the way, in the Midwest, we call it pop. And I don't know what everyone else calls it, but I know there's like different regions that call it different things. And so obviously Mormons, they do call it soda, but I grew up having it be called pop. But anyway, they call it soda, so that's what I'll call it. And so regular soda, like sugar is, everything in moderation. And I truly believe that diet soda really has serious impacts on mental and physical health. And I will die on that hill. And so for the women listening to this right now who are like 6 Diet Cokes deep, I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to ruin your life, but I will tell you. So my mom, I was born in 1981, and in the 80s, Diet Coke was all the rage, and she, drank and drank and drank that like, women do. And I, as an adult, I was on my mom. You got to stop that. You got to stop that. Those fake sugars, those fake sweeteners, they do have impacts on us physiologically. And I was on her to stop, and she finally did. And now she said she tries it and it tastes like poison to her. And I said, that's because it is poison. And so again, what I'm telling you, and I get on Ryan Bailey about this all the time, is he drinks a lot of Diet Coke. And I'm like, listen, I'm not here to rain on your parade. I just think everything in balance and moderation. And my point of why I'm talking about this all ad nauseum is that with Mormonism, there are these very odd black and white situations that I believe can create more problems, right? Like if, and I'm not judging the religion. That's not for me to judge, but I'm just saying psychologically speaking is that if soda is all you can do, well, then doesn't that stand to reason that might become a compulsion, or you can kind of like overly engage in that? All I'm saying is think about what you're putting in your body. I like soda just like everybody else. I just think in moderation it's important. And I can't imagine that drinking it several times a day is helpful at all. But who am I? We also see at this baby blessing that Jen's mom is a cleaning woman at the hospital that Zach's dad is a heart surgeon. And so the reason why this is so important is because Zach knows that Jen needs this marriage in a lot of ways. And so that being the precedent, I feel that Zach treats Jen that way. You're less than, your family's less than, your mom is a cleaning woman at the hospital, and it's like there's a grandiosity in his approach that to me is very indicative of some stuff. So then we start to see this division between the sinners versus the saints. And Whitney, Jen, and Macy are seen as the most devout of the group. And then it becomes this thing where the saints are like the plastics, from Mean Girls, where it's like, well, we're the most devout of the group, therefore we're the good ones and you're the bad ones. And that's just not how life is. It's how we treat people. So for example, this is what drives me wild about religion. Whitney will say, I'm the most devout, and then treat people like utter and complete shit. But you're religious and you go to church every Sunday, so who cares about that, right? Like, I just can't tolerate that. Macy is a good example of someone who is devout, who is faithful, but also espouses that in her daily life as a good human being. Like, if you are a faithful person and then you go out into the world and you act like an asshole, well, that's not cool. Then who cares? You know what I mean? You're just like every other asshole then. They talk about in this episode about how, the word of wisdom talks about our body as a temple and to take care of our bodies. But again, lots of soda and plastic surgery and laughing gas, that sort of stuff. It's like, I think I talked about this in episode 1, where when you make these hard and fast rules that humans can't adapt to or that sets them up for failure, they'll find these loopholes that it's essentially just them telling themselves like, this is okay because of this. And essentially then what happens is people end up having to give themselves permission to be human. And then there's guilt and shame. And it's just a psychological cluster. But I found it interesting that Demi and Jessie and some of the other ladies were not invited to the baby blessing because Jen says they're not as faithful of me. They shouldn't be invited to a sacred event. And I just thought, girl, that man has brainwashed you, because that was the most elitist nonsense thing that I have ever heard. Give me a break. I did not like how Zach talked to Jessie and Demi because there was this flashback of like Jen talking to them on the phone about like why they can't come. Because basically she's saying, you're not good enough. You're not a good enough Mormon, which is just, again, it's like the judgment from this person and you're saying you're the most faithful. Give me a break. Act out your religion as a human. Be a good citizen. Be a good person. How about let's try that? But so I did not like how Zach talked to Jessie and Demi. And that's him talking to other women that aren't his wife on camera. Imagine how he talks to people off camera. I shudder to think. And Jessie and Demi said this could have been solved with communication, and they were right. They were absolutely right. So Demi identifies as a progressive Mormon. And, so Taylor made a comment about Dakota ripping her a new one when it came to the Galentine's Day party that they had, which I love a Galentine's Day party. I think that's so sweet. But what I loved about this Galentine's Day party, it was like a party with all of this subversive anger and judgment. And I'm just like, I didn't love that. But, and Taylor, like, you shouldn't live in fear of being treated like a child. So I'll just say that. Okay, now let's talk about the fruity cereal incident. The girls' trip to California, Demi shared a story involving her and her husband, Brett. She had an intimate conversation about that with the ladies, and he was not aware of it. And they engaged in a sexual act using Fruity Pebbles. Great. Mazel. Whatever. Who gives a hoot? But Whitney decided to really be an absolute dick, which she knew what she was doing. She knew what her goal was. That's the thing that bothers me about Whitney is like she'll pretend to be this innocent fawn in the woods. And in reality, the way that she thinks, I think, is quite dark and quite calculated. personally. She looks very innocent, which I think is how she gets away with a lot of stuff, but I can see right through that. So Demi laid out this intention for her party, and Whitney violated her trust by giving her this box of Fruity Pebbles in front of the whole group to embarrass her and to make her feel bad. Then Whitney laughs hysterically about it like a true mean girl. And then when Demi walks away and gets mad, when Whitney doubles down and then cries and makes herself the victim, I was like, oh my God, that was wild to watch. That was wild to watch. Whitney should teach a masterclass in how to gaslight and manipulate and make yourself the victim. I've never seen anyone do it like her. I swear to you, I've never seen it. It's so wild. So she literally, Demi was like upset with her and she was like, well, why are you upset with me? Well, now I'm upset with you. And it was just like, yeah, you're doing this because you did something wrong. And instead of just admitting it like a mature adult human, you have to double down and victim, because that's all you know how to do. She has no idea. Here's the thing with Whitney and Connor's relationship, Whitney has no idea how to repair or repair fractures or communicate. And so I do wonder how that fits in with her relationship with Connor and how that fits in with some of Connor's behaviors. I can't imagine what that marriage is like because she's never wrong. She never admits to anything. It's just so wild. And what I loved about the end of the episode is that they talked about the sinners versus the saints, and the sinners were literally bowling on the Sabbath, which is Sunday, and the Sabbath is supposed to be a day for worship and things like that. So they were literally sinning while the saints were literally at a baby blessing. And it was just such a literal example of how we are who we believe we are. We are exactly who we think we are. And if you believe you're a sinner, and if you believe you're a saint, and it doesn't matter how you actually behave, because in my opinion, I know this is going to be a wild statement, I believe that the sinners are better humans, and the saints have a lot of religious cultural stuff that makes them do what religious folks do, which is act terribly and then just pretend that they're more faithful people, so therefore they're better. And that's, in my book of people, that's not how it is. So I'd hang with the sinners any day of the week. That's me snapping, because any day of the week I would. So the other interesting thing that I noticed at the baby blessing is that only men carry the priesthood, so women don't get to engage in the blessing. The inherently patriarchal nature of this, which they showed, by the way, the men putting their hands on the baby and the women just like in the corner, just like praying, like little lemmings. Here's my thing with Mom Talk. Mom Talk was really intended to be breaking this patriarchal kind of nature that we see in this religion. But until everyone is on the same page about going against the patriarchy, that Mom Talk can never really be what it's intended for, right? You can really, going against the patriarchy is about your behavior and saying, okay, so I know that my religion says this, but I also know that I'm a valuable person, that the only reason this child is here is because I birthed it and I fed it and I nurtured it. I don't like women being on the outside of a process that wouldn't exist without them. Oh my goodness, this has been an episode. So I hope that you've all enjoyed this. Please stay tuned for episodes 4 through 6 of Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and then episodes 7 and 8, my collaboration with Amy Phillips. And please, thank you all for the wonderful feedback about YBT shorts. This week, I will be doing less shorts just because I'm doing more longer content, but I am loving the shorts and I'm glad that you are all loving it too. So thank you so much for all the messages, the kind words, the support. I appreciate you all. And please remember to take care of yourselves and each other. And ta-ta for now.
Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Abish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.